for this term. Also, today is the deadline for paper number 2. The research paper should be turned in before midnight tonight. I did look at some papers over the weekend, and toward the end of last week, people wanted me to give them feedback on their thesis statements or help find sources. I was also, a few people sent me their papers and said, hey, what would be the score right now based on the rubric if I turned it in? And I was giving people feedback about, oh, well, right now it's probably about an 85. If you wanted to improve that score, you could do these sorts of things. And then they had time to revise and fix things up before today. Or some people, maybe they liked their grade and they just said, okay, submit. But that is a good tool that you can try. A lot of instructors will do that for you, especially if it's a big paper that's worth a lot of points. You can just ask them ahead of time, hey, if I send you my paper a week beforehand, will you tell me how I'm doing, or will you give me some pointers, or will you tell me, roughly where I am grade-wise? And then a lot of instructors will do that for you. So that's a good tool to use, not just in English, in history, and whatever subject you have where you have to do a big project like that is a good idea. Let me share the screen here so that I have the calendar showing. What else? Exam is next week, so that's something to be on top of. We've been going over the study guide for the exam. It's here again. That one, the test starts next Monday. The course evaluations, I put a couple of things also in the Google reminders, just because I feel like some of your other classes you can see, like what's coming up. So one of those things is that if you're going to do STC course evaluations, those close this Thursday. So it's good to take part in those. I don't even get to see the results of them until after the course is finished and my grades are in, and I never know who said what. So it's good to give some feedback. We don't really know at this point if we're going to have what percent face-to-face or what percent digital next year. So if there was something that your instructors did or I did that was helpful or not helpful, it's kind of good to diplomatically say that in your evaluation. They do look at them, and they do, like, especially if you have problems with an instructor, it's good to, like I said, diplomatically put that in your course evaluation, because if too many of those show up, they do remove people from teaching dual or from the faculty list. So it's, obviously it has to be over time, but don't just put okay if it's not okay. That's what those evaluations are for. The other thing I wanted to tell you about, I know some of you saw this pop up here yesterday, is teacher appreciation cards. This week is Teacher Appreciation Week. Nationally, next week, the district will celebrate it. They don't like to celebrate Teacher Appreciation Week the same week that STAR testing is happening. So really, it's going to be 2 weeks. I'm not complaining, but in any case, it's been a tradition at our school for many years since the school opened, because I've been here since the school opened. I was here before the floors were here, actually. That's how you know you're old. And we've been doing teacher notes through the English department since the school opened. And I have this big bag. If you click here, I made a little bit of a video about why teacher notes are special and why I've kept all of mine for 28 years. I have this big bag that I'll show in that video of all the notes for 28 years. And then also how you can participate in that this year. So if you want to do any teacher appreciation cards, we did find a way to do that virtually. So we set up this automated system for sending cards to teachers' emails. So if you want to participate in that, I can tell you right now, the teachers around here are pretty much like zombies. So if they show up on your Zoom with any kind of enthusiasm or energy, it's totally from the coffee and, I don't know, chocolate or donuts or whatever is around here. So everybody could use a little pick-me-up in these weeks going into graduation and finishing off the year. But all you have to do is just select the card, and it will take you to a Google form that's super easy to fill out, and it will go automatically to the teachers' Email. I don't think that should be an assignment. I think teacher appreciation is something that you should want to do from your heart. So I'm not going to assign it, but especially those of you who are graduating, this might be a good time to just think back over the contributions that different teachers have made to your success as you're getting ready to leave East, and think about who you might have coaches, people that you might want to just say thank you for that time that you didn't even know that you helped me, but it really made a difference. And so that's a way that you can do that. This will be open and working through next Friday. So you've got a little bit of time if you decide that you want to do any of those. What else? I think that's all the reminders for today. Today we're going to talk about Virginia Woolf's The Mark on the Wall. I already asked if anybody knows why I have this background. I'm still waiting for any answers. If you read the passage for today, then you would know the answer because it comes right from today's reading, The Mark on the Wall, right here, which we're going to delve into. If you go to Blackboard, probably you already opened the PDF for today, but this is the PDF that I'm going to go through with my annotations. I'm going to talk about a few different modernist concepts and go through the piece here on the PDF. If you did not read about Virginia Woolf, you probably should. She's a really good example of modernist writing. We're reading just a short piece from Virginia Woolf this term, but she has much longer work. She wrote novels and she wrote essays and she wrote longer pieces of fiction. But she's a really good example of modernism. Last week we were talking about how modernism at the beginning of the 20th century was kind of set up to change literature. So whatever you're going to do, keep writing poetry, but do something totally different that nobody has ever seen before, and we'll call it modern. And so we talked about how the Imagist poets started writing like 2-sentence poems and things like that. And the same is also true in fiction. Virginia Woolf was one of those cutting edge modernist writers who tried to think of different ways to write fiction that had never been done before. And one of the things that she did, and we're going to see it in today's passage, is stream of consciousness. She writes about it in her essay, which is also in your textbook, but it's longer, in her essay called Modern Fiction. And it says that she defines the task of the novelist as looking within, as conveying the mind receiving a myriad impressions. And we're going to see that in the piece that I've selected for today. Because the main character, the first person narrator, has this internal monologue going on that sort of jumps around like the way a brain works. The text also says, this is in the background info, in her novels, she abandoned linear narratives in favor of interior monologues and stream of consciousness narration. We're going to be talking about that today because it's not just in her novels, but also in this piece of fiction. You can read a little bit more about her colorful life, but I'm going to get into the notes that are on the piece for today. So stream of consciousness, let me define that for you first so that it will make sense when we talk about this piece. Sometimes people read stream of consciousness work and do not realize that it's stream of consciousness, and they go, what the heck is that? That doesn't make any sense. So stream of consciousness is a type of writing that is an attempt to sort of mimic the way your brain works. If you think about your brain on a daily basis and you think, okay, well, while I'm sitting here doing my homework or listening to Mrs. Ramos on the Zoom or whatever, your mind isn't always completely focused on that task or that topic. What happens in the human brain is other ideas start to pop in, and they're oftentimes random, or the next thought comes from the previous thought, which branches to another thought and another thought and another thought. So we don't just sit here like robots, just focused on a task and then, going through our daily thoughts in a linear fashion. Things come into our mind. We start thinking about last weekend or what I have to do at 4 o'clock today, or you know, an argument I had with my mom. Like things just sort of pop around in our minds. And we have to sometimes consciously go back and focus on our task, whatever it is that we were doing. But writers at the early 20th century, some writers realized, you know, with the help of psychology that's just coming to the forefront at this time, that the brain doesn't work like that, that the brain has this randomizing function that happens very often. And so the writers tried to embody that in stream of consciousness writing. So the mark on the wall is a good example of that. And I'm going to point out to you just how Virginia Woolf does that in this piece. It starts off fairly normal because the first person narrator, it's the first person narrator with I, says that she saw a mark on the wall. She's sitting across the room in her house and she sees something on the wall. And she doesn't know what it is. She starts thinking about, she's thinking about it in past tense because we have looked. And she says that she remembers that she looked at it, it was winter. You know, she was just sort of glancing at it. And as she starts to look at this thing on the wall that she doesn't really know what it is, it's just a little blob, her brain starts jumping around to other topics. She starts thinking about how it sort of looks like a flag that a medieval knight would carry. And then she just goes back to the mark. So what you'll see, and you can see that I highlighted in blue all the places where she's kind of in the present looking at that mark on the wall. And then in purple over here on the side, you'll see I've sort of summarized all the different things that she's thinking about in between her shifting her focus back to that mark. So that's how she's structured the stream of consciousness piece. And so she keeps refocusing back on the mark, but then drifting off again to think about other things. So she starts thinking about maybe it's a nail, maybe it's a nail from a picture that some people who lived there before put up. I wonder what kind of picture those people would have put up, all that sort of thing. And then she goes back to the mark. Maybe it's not a nail, doesn't seem right. And then she starts having a philosophical speculation about humanity. She starts thinking about how quickly we go through life. She compares it to a trip on a, you know, train. She starts thinking about life and death. And so she starts thinking about the underworld in Greek mythology. The fields of asphodel are the flowers in Elysium, in the heavenly part of the land of the dead in Greek mythology. And she then brings herself back to the mark again. She sort of drifts off, and yet that mark on the wall is not a hole at all. Now I've figured out, does she get up and look at the thing? No, she doesn't. She just sits across the room sort of staring at it. Maybe you've had moments like that where your brain just wants to stare at something and not think. And so she's just staring at this thing and kind of thinking, maybe it's not a nail, but then she drifts back because that's how the mind works to maybe it's a leaf. She starts thinking about the tree outside. She starts thinking about Shakespeare and how people sometimes praise themselves. And then she thinks about flowers again and her self-image. Shattering self-image, questions about reality. I highlighted this part right here. She thinks about how novelists will in the future be even more modern, because she says the novelists in future will realize more and more the importance of these reflections. In other words, like the fleeting thoughts in a person's mind. For of course, there's not one reflection, but an almost infinite number. Those are the depths they will explore. So she's sort of predicting or foreshadowing how writers will continue innovating and being new in their writing structure and ideas. Then she starts thinking about generalization, reflecting on the past. If you read through this, you'll see that these are just summaries of all the different things that she's thinking in that stream of consciousness. She starts thinking about male-female roles, and then she touches on the idea of war, because as she's writing this, World War I is underway. And some critics say that part of the point of this piece is that the war is so overwhelming and traumatizing, even for civilians, that she's just staring at this thing on the wall. Her mind is racing, and that's sort of an effect of that sort of traumatic situation. I think we probably have a mild version of that in our situation over the past year, right? There's lots of days where I don't want to do anything. I want to come home from work and just sit and stare into space until I fall asleep. I don't want to think. I mean, it's just sometimes it's just too much. And so some critics say that the war is an undertone in this piece, but probably the catalyst for her staring at this mark and having all of these random thoughts. She breaks out of that thought about war and starts thinking about how the mark on the wall seems to project, like it's three-dimensional and coming off of the wall. She still doesn't know what it is. So either she's far away or she's got bad eyesight or it's super tiny. And so then she starts thinking about how if it's bumpy, and it's three-dimensional, not flat, she starts thinking about the terrain of a battlefield and antiquaries, that is people who sell antiques, what kind of people they are. She says, if I were to get up at this moment and ascertain that the mark on the wall is really, what shall we say? Like she said, I could get up and look at it, but her brain is just kind of like staring at it instead. She goes back to thinking about how the different generations in the house might have caused that little speck, or how they would have decorated it, or that sort of thing. What type of person might have lived in this house previously. And then she says, I must jump up and see what that mark on, but she doesn't. And she starts thinking about nature and self-preservation through nature. She mentions Whitaker's table of precedency a few different times, and I just want to touch on that because I don't know if there's a footnote. But that is kind of a hierarchy of society specifically focused on men and like whose power is higher than the other person. So it's kind of like the great chain of being, but more specific to the patriarchy and to the idea of, well, if you're an archbishop, then you're on this level. And if you are an earl, you're on this level. And it's all masculine dominated. So she starts thinking about that. And then she starts thinking about nature, which could go back to the mark because she's been wondering a few times if it's something natural or human made. She says, indeed, now that I have fixed my eyes upon it, I feel that I have grasped a plank in the sea. That's a metaphor, like comparing it to, since I've been looking at it, it makes me feel a little bit safe or anchored, or like not completely safe, but somewhat safe. And she launches into this idea of the reality versus the dream. Also, I would probably mention that there's this internal, external thing that's taking place. All these thoughts are inside of her. She's just sitting there. Like to the outside viewer, she would just be sitting on a chair and looking at the wall. I don't think that would be a very good play or movie if they were going to make a movie of this. You'd have to go inside her mind to have any kind of interest. And so there's this contrast between reality versus dream that she brings up here, but also the reality of her outside existence versus her internal existence, which is, quite opposite. She continues the thought about nature, thinking about wood and trees. It turns into a little bit of a pastoral scene with meadows and forests and things like that. And she starts thinking about the nature of trees, their life cycle. So you can see she's all over the place, but we all are in our own minds, right? It just happens. At the very end, she's brought back to the present moment because we realize, and so does she, that somebody is in the room and has been in the room with her the whole time. Because then all of a sudden someone is standing over me and saying, I'm going out to buy a newspaper. So snap back to the room, the mark, the present. And somebody says, I'm going out. And that person also says, it doesn't really matter about buying newspapers. They don't put anything in them anymore. Curse this war. Goddamn this war. All the same, I don't see why we should have a snail on our wall. And so it's that moment where she realizes that the spot on the wall was a snail. It's revealed to her only through this other person that's in the room. And that's the end of the piece when she has that realization. So hopefully you can see the modernist elements here, because she's really trying an experiment with the way the mind works and that stream of consciousness writing. It will persist through modernism. Not every writer used that technique, but many do, and poets also. So it's a predominant enough sort of technique that it's worth mentioning. I think that it's on the study guide for the exam too, as one of the terms. So that is why I have a snail on my wall. Right there. Questions on this piece? I have the chat open. There is a study guide for the mark on the wall, and it's right here. Are there any questions on the study guide that you want me to spend a little time talking about? I think I touched on a number of them. Take a minute and look over those questions just in case. Feel pretty good about it? All right, well, you can continue looking through that. I just want to talk about a couple more things for later in the week. This is a B week, but we are not going to be able to have class on Friday. I had scheduled like a day where if we wanted to, we could meet up, talk about the exam study guide, if there's any final questions, anything that you want me to go over. But we can do that at the end of class on Thursday after we talk about Catherine Mansfield's The Garden Party, because I have to give an AP exam. I'm giving the Euro exam. I have to proctor that test Friday afternoon. So I think that starts at noon. So I won't be able to meet with this class on Thursday. My morning classes I can meet with if they choose, but Thursday we will talk about anything on the exam that you want me to spend some time talking about on the study guide. And so Thursday will be our last class meeting for this term. Your exam, you need to remember to do that between the 10th and the 13th. I will not be able to extend that window for you. So do make sure that you start it and finish it before the end of the day on the 13th, because Friday the 14th is the end of the term. So that's kind of why I wanted to touch on anything on Thursday if there's something. So maybe in addition to looking at the garden party for Thursday, also look over the study guide and see if anything sticks out to you that you'd like for me to talk about a little bit at the end of class on Thursday that would help you prepare for the exam. Okay. All right. If there aren't any other questions, then I will go ahead and sign off for today. And I will see you on Thursday for that last piece from Modernism. All right. If you have any questions, you can stick around. I'll stick around until everybody's gone. And if you have any questions on your paper or anything like that, I will help you. Bye.
Bye, Miss.
Bye. Have a good day. Noah, did you have a question?